I'll be collating the questions and we aim to answer them all at the very end. If it makes sense to address them and briefly interrupt my colleagues, I will do that, but that's the aim. So if you put questions in the chat, that'll be grand. Hopefully you've already had sight of the materials that we sent you in advance, hence the release 1. We sent you the materials so that this is designed to be a Q&A session. You know, in the last week, and I think almost in the last day, possibly last hours, we've been gathering up information which will be, hope will be helpful for you and will help us to answer the questions that you've got. So Kath is going to run a quick recap of the presentation, and then we're going to go straight on to the questions after that. Can you please just make sure that your microphones are muted? I'm pretty sure they all are because of the way the meeting is set up, but if you could just double check, that would be really helpful. And I'm going to hand over to Kath Powell.
Could I just, before we start, just remind colleagues that these sessions are being recorded. Hopefully you're all okay with that, but we are duty bound just to let you know so that we can share this session with those who couldn't make it. So if that's a problem for any reason, then you might want to duck out or click in later. But yeah, the recording has now started. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Kath.
No, that's fine. Can everybody hear me? Okay, so right, we're going to start. I will just say the Q&A, if you can put those questions as they come in the Q&A box, we'll answer those at the end, and we'll also try and get any questions we can't answer during this session. We'll get answers out to you over the next day or two. Okay, so the resources you've got, first of all, Helen just explained how the 3 sessions will work. Resources will go out to you on a Friday, and sessions will be the Q&A the following Thursday. Next week, we'll be looking at supporting SEND, and the third week, we'll be looking at assessment and feedback through remote learning. So the first one, I just wanted to point your guidance to the guidance that's come out. There's lots and lots of guidance come out in the last 2 weeks, and really directing you to the most, prominent guidance that's going to help you, that I'm sure all of you will have looked at already. That first one about get help with remote education is really, an interface for you to go to, a go-to place, a menu where there's lots of access to webinars, directs you to lots and lots of support you can get for CPD for your staff, and there's lots of things on there, so that's a real go-to area. The other one is the restriction attendance that was released at the first week back after Christmas, particularly pointing to 46, 51 and 52. There's some very clear expectations around remote education that the DfE have set out there, and they're really good starting points for that discussion when you start to look at really reviewing what you've got on offer as a school. So just moving on, I'm just going to pass on to my colleague Helen, who's going to talk about the support through EdTech in Devon. Over to you, Helen.
Thanks, Kath, that's brilliant. If following on from the Get Help with Remote Education, if you follow the Get Help link mentioned in the slide before, one of the options you'll come across is for the EdTech Demonstrator Programme. So if you've got specific tech questions, then you can get help with those questions through the link. The way it works is that you'll need to go through the Cornerstone Academy Trust for your sort of initial inquiry, but if you decide you want to take them up, then the procedure is you go to the link at the bottom where it says Home EdTech Demonstrator Programme. That's run by the London Grid for Learning. If you click on there, then you need to fill in a PID form, project initiation document. I'm assured by Cornerstone that it's very, very simple. It will get you free support, so hopefully that's worth it. Cornerstone will offer both tech support for you to do things like set up classrooms. Most of you have done that already, or advice about the technical aspects. They are very much a Microsoft school, as I'm sure, or Microsoft Academy, as I'm sure you're already aware. But they will offer one-to-one bespoke support for things like learning design, lesson design, that kind of thing, which is fairly generic across whatever platform you're using. If you decide that you want EdTech demonstrator support, but you don't want to go through Cornerstone or through, you don't want Microsoft specific advice, then you go through the same London Grid for Learning link and you complete the same form, but you specify that you want, for example, Google Classroom support. Cornerstone are offering this for free, as all the support through this link is for free. And they're very keen to work with schools and help you with some one-to-one training. So hopefully that's helpful. Thanks, Kath. I think we're on to you next.
Thanks, Helen. We're just going to move through. The statutory expectations, I think everybody's quite clear of what they are now, but just outlining that 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours does include work set. It doesn't mean that that has to be 3 hours live or 3 hours set recorded lessons. That's including the work set, and they're the recommendations of the statutory expectations. I've got to move on to the Ofsted definitions, and I really would say this is a good point if you haven't done this already to have a quick look at this link. It not only outlines some of the definitions that Ofsted are referring to around remote education, there's a real good little myth buster around on that page that looks at some of the things in the room, if you like, that haven't been proved through research, and it's really clear on some of those myths where there's not research to back them up. But they're also very clear here about what they expect, and they're very clear about keeping it simple, about focus on the basics. But the one thing they really do highlight is the fourth bullet point on there is around feedback, retrieval practice and assessment being more important than ever. And that's something to really think about in your offer, about actually whatever stage you're working at, how relevant is that retrieval practice within your offer for remote education. And I know that's been a key thing over the last 18 months of people developed their offer around curriculum. There's no definition. I can see we've got one around reception. We'll come back to that one in a minute, if that's okay, at the end of the session. I'm just going to move on to the 7th slide when it comes up. Okay, the other one is, the next one I'm going to point your direction is around the template to have on your website. Now, I know, having looked at several websites in Devon over the last week, that lots of you already have your documentation on the website, but by the 25th of January, you have to have the a definition of remote education on your website, whether you choose to use the DFE form or not. And what I would say as far as the DFE form goes is it's very clear, and it points you in to the template, really does point you in to focusing on what the expectations are, both from remote education now and as and when if we go back into school and groups have to isolate. The platform, the assessment and feedback, and really about how you as a school are supporting or amending for students with additional needs. And it also really points out very clearly with parents around that sort of contract around parental engagement. So that template or your own version needs to be on your website by the 25th of January. Okay. I'm going to move you on to the next one. And again, this came out at a similar point last week, and it's a document about reviewing your remote education offer. Now, looking at this, it breaks your remote education down into 7 strands, and it's a very clear document that can really help you identify where the strengths and areas for further development are in your current offer. And talking to some school leaders this week, where they are using it, they're thinking about using it as a benchmark, a real live document, and coming back to it, setting it over the next, looking at it every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, to think about the areas they need to work on. And that really focuses on leadership, content engagement, curriculum and planning. It talks about the capacity and the capability, so you can really identify around where your strengths are with your staffing, any areas you might want to go to the additional support that Helen just discussed. It talks about communication and about your lines of communication and how you're communicating to be realistic about what's on offer at home and parents at home and how they're working. And the final one is around safeguarding. And I think it's a really useful tool, and also to engage governors with their understanding of where you are as a school with remote education and how they can support you moving forward. the final slide here is just really, we've pulled together the resources that we feel are you know, really good support directives to you, and I know a lot of you will already be using these already. You've got the Oak Learning Academy, again, lots of great resources there to use to supplement your offer, or you can go in and amend some of those resources. You've got the guidance from ACSL, you've got some work from the NSPCC around safeguarding and really thinking about really thinking about the policies and things that you might have to make any amendments to around your remote learning offer. Have you got anything to add, Amanda or Helen?
No, I think you've explained that really clearly, and I think what would be a good thing to do now, if it's all right with Kath, I can see, and Helen too, I can see the chat is already filling up, so we're going to segue kind of into that. This is a session for you colleagues to share your own experiences, to share your practice, to ask questions, to make comments. I think we are all at the stage where none of us have all the answers at the moment. We've been given a huge amount of guidance to distill and to communicate, which we hope we've done for you here. And Helen, do you want to pick up any of the points so far? I'm interested in the one about parental engagement.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, actually. It's come up a lot.
It's coming up a lot, isn't it? Yeah.
It really is, yes. So shall we address that at the end, or shall we, would you like to address that now? It's a really huge one. In particular, the issue about parents who are not engaging and attendance, and the link between. At the moment, I think you know we're all kind of bottoming that out. Some of the things that are happening in schools are, for example, the engagement of pupils is being logged and reviewed very, very frequently, and then analysed, and you know looking for the common patterns and saying what are the common issues with parents. Looking at that first and then seeing if the engagement can be increased. I mean, there are the obvious things about technical support, all of that, but aside from the technical support, some of the things that parents are finding are, for example, they have difficulties in timetabling for their family. They've got lots of siblings. They're finding it really difficult to find a way to organise their days so that they can, you know, so that the children can access the learning in a manageable way. What comes up is that the approach needs to be really bespoke. One of the, for obvious reasons, because families vary. I've just seen Cheryl's point there, actually, vulnerable pupils whose parents have chosen not to attend school but are not engaging in remote learning at home. What else can we do beyond phone calls? I think the first thing is monitor it, isn't it? Which you may well be doing anyway, but some schools are rag rating their families and their children to see who, you know, where there is a frequent lack of engagement. And I agree, Tim, actually expectations are significantly higher this time around. It's not so much about care, is it? It's much more about education. So in terms of following up, at the moment, you know, attendance is attendance, isn't it? And engagement is something else. And it's very much about making sure that you're really onto your families. Amanda, did you want to? I've just got looking through. We made a list that came up in school, and I've just thought of something. But I need to take a break and just have a look at my list, if that's all right. So.
Yeah, that's fine. Colleagues, I've just put some of my... Oh, I'm getting terrible feedback very suddenly. Sorry if I sound a bit blurry.
No, you sound okay to me.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I've just put something in the chat box around my thoughts on this. I think it's a really difficult situation at the moment, because we're in a situation where we've got to provide education, but we also have that safeguarding and welfare, that sort of duty of care to children and to families. And if we're not hearing anything at all, I believe we need to be acting and following that up in some way, shape or form. And I would urge you to contact and to liaise with EWOS where you can, to try and keep a log of responses, as I've said, and to really evidence what you're doing to support the engagement of that family, because it becomes more of a welfare issue if you're not hearing anything. in the same way as it would in normal times.
Can I just pick up the one about timetable? We've got one in the chat around timetable and parental restraints. I think, yes, you know, the pressures are on, particularly if you've got working parents at home. I think, first of all, obviously, knowing your families and knowing your parents, we've picked up some really good, what I call nuggets over the last week of talking to colleagues around ways in which their schools might have actually challenged this. They talked about knowing the situation at home, if there's 2 or 3 siblings, and actually staggering those live sessions, so that where there's 2 or 3 siblings at home, there might be a registration at 9, one at 9:15, one at 9:30 for different year groups. They also talked about really having a balance of activities between screen and non-screen time. The guidance is quite clear about the hours engagement, but that does not mean live hours. That's the work, including the feedback, including any calls. They also talked about that timetabling, about creating some times. They found, you know, creating some non-structured sessions where pupils in school can just see their siblings at home and actually have that social interaction online, being really important, but really about that balance of activities. And it's really clear as well from the guidelines that live is important, particularly for that social interaction between the school and the pupils, but it's not the golden nugget. It's only part of that, and actually being really clear about a real rounded offer and a balance and range of things that are included. Did you want to add anything to that, Helen or Amanda, around timetabling?
I've just found the note that I made from talking to the head teacher earlier on. Here it is. It could be duty of care, as Amanda says, so that needs to be borne in mind. If social work is involved, then there's an obvious place to go to pick that up. The whole thing is about knowledge of the family. I mean, it could be that MASH needs to be involved, it could be safeguarding, and even contacting the community police officer may be necessary. You will know your families really well, and thank you, Steve and Sarah, for the comments that you've made about that. But it is, we know, it is a tricky situation. One head said that his way of dealing with it is it would be exactly the same as if the child is not in school and that there's been no explanation. So it would be the same level of follow-up. It wouldn't change. So plus there's a need to think about the referral to your safeguarding policy as well.
Yeah, and can I just remind colleagues that just while I think about the safeguarding policy, we're sending it out in next week's release, but if you haven't seen it, there is an appendix for the new COVID variant that was released by the safeguarding team last week. That will, if you haven't had it, that will come round on tomorrow, in tomorrow's release. I'm just answering the chat about Tim talking about rural bandwidth. And thinking about where you have families who are either struggling to access IT at all, or for one reason or another, which is often out of your control, they still haven't got the IT that they need to do remote learning. Just balancing that live learning, recorded sessions, and actually learning that is not IT based. At home learning projects, and one school I know of still providing paper packs to families that they collect every Monday afternoon from school. So that trying to really sort of support your families in a bespoke way where you can, I think is really important to bear in mind, because we're so driven by the government agenda to do everything live with IT, but for some families that isn't necessarily appropriate and going to work for them, so they need engagement in another way. Okay, what else have we got, ladies?
I'm just looking at the
Emma says that's the policy we're following. Rural bandwidth. Actually,
yeah, that's what I was just talking about.
Yeah. In a meeting yesterday, where some of our villages have just got very, very poor bandwidth altogether, and some of the teachers have ended up having to sort of use their home facilities, where there are problems about that, aren't there? At least potential ones. So what can you do when an entire, it's about geography, an entire village has got poor bandwidth. I'm just scrolling down some of
I think from that point of view,
safeguarding newsletter. Sorry, Amanda, forgive me. Okay.
One thing that came in yesterday was really being conscious. We talk about, and even in the review tool, it talks about well-being, and that's not just well-being of pupils, that's well-being of yourselves and staff as well, and making sure that, with all these pressures on PPA, planning, extra remote delivery, face-to-face delivery for vulnerable pupils in school, but really being conscious to try at all possible to ensure that, you're getting those PPA and thinking of different various ways around that you can offer and create those times for PPA, and where you have got staff, if staff are working from home, to constantly deliver those sessions, ensuring there's a real touch base with them to make sure they're okay if they're not used to working home and being isolated. Yeah, and I've just got one. Yeah, and also Amanda just put out there about parents with young children at home as well. That there is that real balance to make sure that if you've got families where they've got younger siblings at home, some schools are offering sessions where the support staff on the phone line or on email to actually just have that one-to-one with them and getting that information so they can look at a bit of more bespoke support for them around timetabling and around structuring the day at home to help them.
Yeah, I really like that idea of the virtual staff wellbeing forum. There was a question earlier on, I think it was from you, Emma, forgive me, I may be wrong, where you asked something about reception. I've asked the early years team for some of their guidance and wisdom on this, so that's something that we could pick up as a possible area of support in another session. I think from picking up the golden nuggets, loving that term, one of the, it's at the moment it seems to be largely phonics sessions and lots of reading and lots of interaction, which we know works. It doesn't, from the research, the Ofsted research into what works in remote education is that contact with the teacher. The younger the child, the more contact they need, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's got to be live. But that the children are going to respond to that familiar face even more when they're really, really young. But at the moment, it seems to be mostly short inputs around phonics and based on reading and sharing class books. But I would like to seek a bit more on perhaps early maths and how that might work. So we can follow that up if that's something that you're interested in.
Yeah, and I think as well, there's more on this tomorrow in terms of use of support staff, but using them perhaps for if they're in school, maybe they don't have the IT facility at home to do this necessarily, or indeed the confidence sometimes. But if they can be supported to pre-record some story times or some check-ins with pupils, or if they could be supported to run a team session and hear a child read. Do some one-to-one phonics work with the pupil, or even run a little intervention group, that could be really, really valuable and could take the pressure off teachers where they're trying to teach their on-site groups or bubbles and their off-site groups. So there's consideration for support staff coming in tomorrow's release, quite a lot of it. So I won't go into that right now.
I just see we've just got one about parents complaining that secondaries are doing online lessons all day and primaries aren't, and definitely would agree with Mel's comments. Really refer back to the guidance. It's about hours appropriate, that age appropriate, and that includes live and a real mix of activities. I think from a secondary point of view, that's live because in a normal context they would go from lesson to lesson to lesson, and they may be having that live input for 10-15 minutes of the start of the lesson before they get set the activity, as they would in their 5-period day, and that's a very different context to primary. But I really think that it's just a different context, and it just refer back to your plan, and it might be something you come back to when you do that review document as to is it working, what's the feedback, and there's a big bit about communication and feedback from parents in that review document that might be worth considering, and what's doable as well with the current context of staffing.
Absolutely. Actually, some parents have been very positive about the provision that's been put in by schools, which is nice to hear. And I think as the emphasis now is much more on education, whereas previously it was on care, that's a natural progression, I guess, in what we're doing. I think that I understand that, you know, parents see perhaps live lessons from secondary school and feel that's the best, but, you know, as my colleagues have said, it's not necessarily. The point is the sense of contact, the sense of checking in. So, you know, I think that is basically what makes the difference, isn't it? As Ofsted said, that's what makes a good offer, is that there's a sense of interaction at some point between the child and the teacher. That doesn't necessarily mean live lessons. It can be pre-recorded and be just as effective.
Yeah.
And I think there's also, referring back to the EEF document, you know, that research around good remote education. There's a one-pager that's on the page we've got open at the moment. The second one, rapid evidence assessment summary, is a really good go-to, and a point to about the research as another support for parents as to why you're offering that real breadth rather than just all live lessons.
Yeah, I'm really sorry, Cheryl, that you've had a parent who, despite 8 emails, is still adamant that it should be live all day. That's yeah.
Refer them to the DFE documentation.
And the EEF and anything else.
Yeah. The way of delivering point 1 on the Ofsted document is quite good, and it really does talk about it doesn't have to be live and that not gold standard. So that is a good go-to. I'm going to just move the presentation onto that last slide while we're in the last sort of 15 minutes of Q&A with those top tips and things to consider, just to see if it stimulates any other questions. I think it's also being really mindful is really gather that positive. We say, you know, the vast majority of feedback is positive. Gather that. That's real great evidence for, you know, evaluating that what you are doing is working and it's supporting those pupils in your community, and take that and share that with your staff, you know, about the hard work and the effort that is going in at the moment. Take those positives rather than those 1 or 2 negatives. Absolutely. Great, Mel. Great, you're keeping the evidence. Brilliant.
Yes. Yes. Oh gosh, Cheryl, that's really hard to read, isn't it? My goodness, that's a really difficult message. Are your parents not happy with Zoom sessions, or sort of lots of schools are using Zoom or other platforms just to have a either once a day or in some cases twice a day check-in? You know, so that the learning is set. The children go off and do their work, and they use some pre-recorded video material, but there's a very regular check-in. Okay, I hear what you're saying, Cheryl.
Yeah. Thanks, Cheryl.
Yeah, thank you for that.
One of the other things that's come in this week, we've been gathering these golden nuggets, if you like, from colleagues across Devon, is really focusing around the positives and making sure that all that positive reinforcement that you'd have in school is continuing, particularly where you've got pupils that are working at home. And they talked about the power of that, you know, assembly or that gathering at the end of the week, whether that's as a whole school or whether that's as a class point, to really celebrate the great work both at home and at school, and all the efforts that are going in behind the scenes with parents as well, supporting that. And they felt that was a really positive end to the week, and really making sure that pupils that were working at home were also as engaged as those that are in school.
Absolutely. I think that keeping it positive is really good. I have had one conversation about the fact that for some children, and I'm sure, you know, Amanda, your opinion on this, you know, would be really valuable, but for some children, especially those who benefit from a really structured approach, that the need to simplify the lesson structure when it's going out remotely, however, whichever way it's being done, the lesson structure is usually much clearer, or can be much clearer for the children. They know the work is directly related to it, and it's actually made teachers spend less time on sort of trawling for resources and looking for things, and more time on really picking up the misconceptions. So I don't know whether that's your experience, but some schools have found it's really improved their assessment for learning, or improved the potential for their assessment for learning, especially for early career teachers, which has been a bit of a surprise perhaps, and might be a positive that we could possibly take from this time. Steve, I'm just, yes, your comment about small schools, absolutely. And I think it's not just small schools, is it? It's where, folks are off sick, or all sorts of things happen. It can be in quite large schools where, 2 or 3 key people can be off. Yeah. The whole thing is really difficult to run. Did you want to add anything, Amanda?
No, I was just thinking about the content for release 2 tomorrow, and when we were planning it, we were thinking about that structured input for certain pupils, and actually it's good practice for all pupils, isn't it, particularly younger ones. And Helen, you were talking about actually having a sort of pedagogy that's skills based rather than just purely knowledge, but actually ensuring that pupils get the information that they need, but they're not losing those skills that we work so hard, those learning behaviours that we work so hard to develop in school, tend to be the things that go by the wayside when a school is in the situation that we're in now. And I hope, Mel, you don't mind me saying, when I was chatting with you on the phone the other day, you were saying that's the one thing that some of your pupils lost in the last lockdown, because whilst parents were really supportive of remote education and they were engaged with all the content, when pupils came back to school, I think we were talking about maths. I think you were saying to me that they'd lost their sort of skills in maths, but they still had the knowledge. That was fine, but some of the skills had gone by the wayside, because that's the bit that families find more challenging to teach, I guess, because they're not teachers. So I think, there are a lot of challenges there. Things to think about when we think about assessing and where we pick up the academic learning behaviours did. Yes, Mel, that's what I was trying to say. Sorry, in a rambling way. Thank you. Well put.
And can I just pick?
Sorry, Kath.
Can I just pick up on the chat? You talked about look how far you've come in the last year. I think it's really take stock on that, but also look at how far you've come in the last 2 weeks. Christmas seems a distant memory. It's only been 2.5 weeks, so just really, take stock on that, of everything else coming in around you. As school leaders, do a fantastic job to mobilise and adapt and overcome that just within a very short space of time. And I just wanted to pick up on Helen's point. We are going to look at assessment in the 3rd week, but just a couple of things that have come in this week from speaking to people from around the county is really thinking about that workload, and every piece of work. Is it being possible for you to maintain that mark in every piece of work that comes through? And some schools really thinking about pre-setting, either on a daily or a weekly basis, which pieces of work are going to get the feedback, so that parents at home and the pupils know those are the pieces of work they can expect that feedback on. And also it's much more manageable for teachers in school that are giving that feedback and assessment. But we will pick up on those things in week 3. But again, that was some really key things, a couple of colleagues talking about that, having that preset and having that as part of their expectations in the template, so parents know what and when the feedback's going to be on which pieces.
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree with that, Kath. That's a really good point.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we will pick up on that in session 3. Assessment for learning has become a hot issue at the moment, and I think that really links with the emphasis on retrieval and the build up, how the curriculum is going to be built on prior learning, even in these difficult times, and how individual subjects will need to be adapted for your remote learning, your remote education. I think that may be another focus. Over to you, Kath. Sorry,
Helen.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Helen. Just picking up again, Mel, you talked about the loss of independent thinking skills from the last lockdown. There's just a bullet point on that guidance about restricted opening. That final bullet point it talks about schools need to consider their catch-up plan for the return of opening, and with all this amongst us, you know, that we're trying to deal with at this moment in time, also really thinking about these things you're picking up now about how they might feature in your catch-up plan as and when the proposed reopening of schools begins, because again, that's going to be that real focus. You may have made plans with your COVID catch-up based on the last lockdown, but things might be changing this time. So really thinking about going forward and having that strategic thinking about some of those things with that catch-up plan in mind. Great, Mel.
Okay, I'm just going to scroll back through the chat and just see if there's anything. Thank you, Sarah. Yes, the whole wellbeing is a massive issue, and making sure that even basic things like teachers' PPA is protected, particularly at the moment where the structure of the day is very different, and it's very easy for teachers to be working, and leaders obviously, but you know, working for very, very long hours. I think that's it's always been an issue in education, I know, but it really is now. And parents, yeah, agreed.
And
Definitely.
SLT, yes.
Definitely SLT, Emma, definitely. I'm just going to scroll back through the chat, colleagues, just to see if there's anything that I have not picked up from earlier on.
And can we just ask at this point, would people welcome a document with nuggets that we've picked up over the last 2 weeks sharing along with the recording if you wanted of this session? If you could just let us know in the chat, we could send those out, and we'll try and take a few nuggets from the chat as well. And I do think maybe we could pick up on wellbeing over the next 2 sessions, interleaved with the support staff and the assessment for learning. Keep that on the agenda with these Q&As.
We've got lots of yeses there. We'll make sure that gets out to you.
Good. I'm just scrolling through. I think we've covered.
Are there any other questions that people would like to pose while everybody's still on the line? We're conscious of making sure that we finish pronto at 4:15. We know how busy everybody is. Definitely,
yeah,
Emma.
Yeah, and just regarding that, Emma, we do meet regularly and feed back as part of our One Devon agenda to Devon colleagues. So they are fully aware of how hard you are all working and of how challenged you are. And, you know, we are fully supportive of you and grateful to you. We know how hard things have been and continue to be. And we are very loud in our voices for you within the forums where we can do that. I hope that reassures you, Emma and other colleagues.
Yeah.
Can we just ask if any leaders are on the line that are really struggling with devices for any of their learners? Can you let us know either in the chat or by contacting your advisor if you're struggling to get hold of devices and you have parents or families that you don't have them for? Please, can you let us know? And we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, I don't want to make too many promises here, but there's an outline possibility we may be able to get some tablet provision, but we're not sure,
Okay.
and we need to gauge interest. So it's one of those things where a commercial going to get there in a minute. The commercial supplier is offering possibly some extra tablet devices, but we have these. Oh, okay, all right. I'm not making promises, but I've just been asked to gauge any interest. So if you are interested in following that up, then just tell us in the chat, and I'll get back to you. But as ever with these things, it's not a promise; it's just a possibility.
We've got one about licenses, Helen. I don't know whether EdTech and the expertise will be able to support there. Just trying to roll back.
Definitely. Is it Microsoft licenses? Presumably it is. If it is, then I'd contact Cornerstone. They're really good on that kind of thing. And I do, you know, they have got an entire area of their website devoted. The link is on the slide.
Oh, the DFE is the DFE ones. They should be able to help then, shouldn't they?
Yes, they should. They will help you with that. They'll help you with any tech advice. They also have loads and loads of video resources and CPD materials that you can access. But you have to fill in
Just
the.
put that slide back up, Davis.
Next, it's slide 4. Perfect.
There, is it the one? Am I displaying it properly now? Yeah.
Perfect.
There you go.
Yeah.
So it's a 5-day delay, Katie. But would Cornerstone be able to do that? Do you think, Helen?
I'd definitely give it a go. Definitely. The only slight awkwardness with it is because it's DFE funded, it has to go through the London Grid for Learning. They are the portal for EdTech support. But I'm promised by David James at Cornerstone that it is an easy process. It's an easy form, and you can specify Cornerstone, or you could go with someone completely different. That's fine. Or if you want a Google Classroom demonstrator, for example, they can help you with all that tech support.
Cheryl, you've just asked about licenses. Again, just what Helen said. Go via the EdTech route, and they should be able to help you. Does that answer your question, Cheryl?
Getting the licenses for free. Well, as the EdTech portal is funded by the DFE, Katie, I'd go there, try that out, because it's the main portal for any tech support. It's worth a try.
And I think as well, they'd be well placed to signpost you to the correct place if they can't help you directly.
We need some devices as we have families without. Okay. We'll take that forward, Kayleigh, and see what we can find out for you. We will, at the end of this session, we will download the chat. So we'll have a record of it. Anything that we haven't followed up in sufficient detail that you'd like more, we will go back to you, and we can have an individual email conversation if you've got other questions that we haven't got time to address, or you want more detail on something that, as we've said or covered this afternoon. We're very keen to meet your needs. So if you've got any suggestions for things that you would like covered under the umbrella of perhaps SEND and individual support, or assessment for learning, feedback, which is the theme for release 3, please let us know. In terms of tech nuggets, the advice is just, if you can, have somebody who's on the end of the email dedicated to at least collating any questions from parents regarding tech, so that they go to one person and not straight to class teachers. That does help with workload. And just, okay, sorry, Cheryl, I'm just reading what you've got to say there. Okay, tech support for SCONUS. Excellent. So if you've got, if parents have got tech difficulties, try and put aside an email address and a person to address those things, so that it doesn't go straight to class teachers. I think that's it on the tech support nuggets, as far as I can see, just glancing through the list. Anything else, colleagues, that
No, I think we've addressed everything, and we're running to time, and I don't want colleagues to feel pressured to stay if you've got other things to do. So, Helen, shall we say that the event's kind of, if you need to leave, that's fine.
Yeah,
we'll hang around in here in the room.
Yeah, indeed.
It's great. Thank you for tuning in. We hope to see you all next week. Same thing, different release.
Indeed. And then for assessment, if you've got any questions that you want to ask in advance, please do let us know. We'll do our best to. We know, if we know in advance, that's great. We know we'll incorporate it.
And thanks to everybody, and please pass on thanks back at school for all the hard work you're doing. It really is appreciated by Devon. So keep resilient. We'll keep going. We're here if you need us. Just pick up the phone.
Thanks, Jenny. It's a pleasure. It is great for us to connect with folks as well.
Thanks, Tim. I can see you were just following up on Cheryl there, and we'll see what we can do as well. on the DFE licenses. If there's anything, Tim, that's great.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. That's really helpful. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks, Louise. Thanks, Cheryl.
Thanks, Cheryl. Glad you like the golden nuggets. Yeah.
Thank you, Leah.
Okay, I think we're down. It's just us, ladies.
I'll just save the chat.
Thank you, Amanda.
I'll turn the recording off now. Oh no, I'll save the chat first.
Tell me when. I'll do the record button. I missed it at the beginning, Amanda.
I know. I hope you don't mind me taking over. It's on the top by the Wi-Fi button.